Gargoyle's Quest was released way back in July of 1990, only a year after the original Game Boy's launch, if you can believe it or not. If you recall that period of time, developers were still struggling to find that sweet spot for portable games. Should they be quick bursts of fun, or should they have more meat on the bones like their NES console brethren? This was a time of Tetris and Super Mario Land, not The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening. This was also the time period where Capcom was literally on fire. Almost all their console efforts on the NES from this point in time are today considered classics. And they wanted to do something a little bit different with the Game Boy hardware, and Gargoyle's Quest was their attempt at breaking new ground, or breaking the mold. In an era where genres weren't yet fully fleshed out, such as role-playing games for example, Capcom did something really unique with Gargoyle's Quest. They combined side-scrolling action platforming with an RPG, making for a wholly unique experience that is truly unlike anything else on the original Game Boy. You take on the role of FIrebrand, the red gargoyle enemy from the Ghost and Goblins series. You know that one, the guy that steals Arthur's armor and is a true pain in the ass to kill? FIrebrand is destined for great things. He's supposed to become the Red Blaze, the one who will restore peace to the Ghoul realm. It's a really simple story, but it sets the stage for this awesome adventure. You move around an overworld as you would in any RPG of the time, getting sucked into random encounters every now and then, although I should mention that the encounter rate is nowhere near as high as it is in something like Dragon Quest or Dragon Warrior or the original Final Fantasy. The map also isn't as large, so the random encounters aren't really that annoying, although they don't really serve too much of a purpose other than to acquire vials, which are the game's form of currency. Instead of fighting one enemy at a time, you often have to fend off a couple of enemies in a very small side-scrolling action platforming level, I guess you could call it, although it's really tiny. Usually there's like 3 enemies and that's it. There are also massive dungeon-like areas where the bulk of the game takes place. This is where you'll have bosses at the end of the stage, and they're far more challenging encounters than the random encounters, and feature way more complex platforming sections. FIrebrand has the power to float for a short period of time and uses projectiles to attack his foes. He can also cling onto ceilings, which is nice, and allows for some rather creative platforming sections in some of the dungeons. Over time, by acquiring special power-ups, FIrebrand can learn to fly for long periods of time, jump higher, and have access to more powerful projectile attacks, some of which can even destroy blocks. The RPG elements are what really make this game feel unique. There's something very refreshing about visiting towns, talking to villagers, and going on fetch quests, but not having to worry about grinding or leveling up like crazy as you would in other RPGs. That's taken care of by tackling the main dungeons or story sections where Firebrand's powers are pretty much automatically increased once you complete the area. There's also a few Metroid-ish elements where you require certain power-ups in order to proceed, such as being able to fly for longer than, say, 2 seconds, or the previously mentioned ability to break blocks to access new areas. There is a password system in place here, although it's not overly complex like some of those early 16-digit NES passwords were. Thankfully though, if you play the game on the 3DS's Virtual Console, you can make use of save states, which make the game much more playable and make the password system more or less moot. Audio-visually, this is a very impressive game for being such an early Game Boy game. The music is highly reminiscent of the Ghosts and Goblins soundtrack and features very similar sound effects as well. You can really tell this game belongs to that series. Graphically, the stages look quite distinct, although they aren't quite as refined as some of the later Game Boy games such as Link's Awakening, but obviously that's to be expected from a game that was released 1 year after the launch of the system. Gargoyle's Quest is a phenomenal Game Boy game and the start of a legendary and highly underrated and obscure franchise. I highly recommend you give this one a try. It's available on the 3DS's Virtual Console as mentioned already, but it can also be played on any of the Game Boy models from the original all the way up to and including the incredible Game Boy Advance SP. And don't forget that you can also use the Game Boy Player on the GameCube if you're lucky enough to have one. Whatever you do, I highly recommend you go play Gargoyle's Quest. You will not be disappointed.